This day in sports history.
Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
Hey, this is Steve White, the host of This Day in Sports History. The situation in western North Carolina continues to be dire for so many who lost everything. Those who still have a home may be without power or access to cleaner running water for several more weeks. Some are trapped by washed-out roads. Communication has been severed. So consider a donation to the Western North Carolina Red Cross or another local charity that's doing work to help those affected by the storm. I've put some links in the show notes if you would like a few suggestions. Thanks. And now, here's today's episode. Hey, and welcome back to This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Network. You can check out more podcasts and find more information at sportshistorynetwork.com. It's October 10th, and on this day in 1920, the Cleveland Indians did a couple of things that had never been done before in the World Series. The modern version of the World Series has been around since 1903. It skipped a year in 1904 before becoming a postseason staple in 05. So here we are in 1920, and there has been a little bit of history in the Fall Classic up to this point. In the 1920 edition, it was the Cleveland Indians against the Brooklyn Robins. They wouldn't be called the Dodgers until 1932. Cleveland had some heavy hitters, and they ended up outscoring Brooklyn 21-8 in this series, but there were only 2 home runs hit the entire series, and both of those were hit by Cleveland. Probably the biggest reason for that is both of these teams played in cavernous ballparks. Brooklyn's Ebbets Field was .477 to center. Cleveland's League Park was .460. By comparison, the deepest center field in the majors now is in Houston's Minute Maid Park at 435 feet, and that's 15 feet further than the next closest. So, figure into the mix a fairly inconsistent ball that got knocked out of shape, and you can understand why no more than 2 were actually hit. But one of the firsts in this series was a home run. This was in Game 5, and the series was tied 2 games apiece. In the bottom of the first, Elmer Smith stepped to the plate with the bases loaded, and he unloaded on a Burley Grimes spitball for the first Grand Slam in World Series history. On the other side was Jim Bagby, who was the Indians pitcher on this day, and he stepped up to take some swings in the 4th inning with his team still protecting that 4-0 lead and 2 men on. Bagby unleashed his fury on another Grimes pitch for a 3-run homer, becoming the first pitcher to ever homer in a World Series game. And in case you were wondering, yes, Babe Ruth had played in 2 World Series with the Boston Red Sox by this point, and he had yet to hit one. So, that's 2 firsts from this game, but the thing that is most remembered from this game is what happened in the 5th inning. The Robins had men on first and second with no outs. They were trailing 7-0 at this point, but maybe they were set to have a big inning. Clarence Mitchell came to the plate with big ideas, and he smashed a liner that appeared to be headed into the gap in right center. But Cleveland second baseman Bill Wamsgans snagged it, stepped on second to double up the runner, who had broken for third, and then he turned to tag out the stunned runner coming from first for not only the first triple play in World Series history, but the first unassisted triple play in World Series history. The Indians went on to win the game 8-1 and then clinched the series 2 days later. I've talked a few times already about the year that Bob Gibson had in 1968, the 1.12 ERA during the regular season, the MVP and the Cy Young Award, the record 17 strikeouts in Game 1 of the '68 World Series. Well, on this day, it was Game 7 of the World Series, and Gibson was back on the mound. He'd already won twice in this series, and if you were a Cardinals fan, this is the man that you wanted on the hill that day. He squared off with Detroit's Mickey Lolich in this one, and this game was a beaut for the first 6 innings. That is, if you like pitchers' duels. It was a scoreless tie heading into the 7th, and in fact, Gibson had sent the first 2 Tiger batters in the top half to the bench. But with 2 outs, the Tigers were able to get a couple of hits, and that brought up heavy-hitting Jim Northrup. Now, listen, I'm a guy who did not play baseball past high school, so who am I to criticize a big leaguer, especially a good defensive outfielder like Curt Flood? Flood was a 7-time Gold Glove winner for his play in the outfield, but the one thing that I remember as a kid is that when a ball is hit to you in the outfield, your first step should always be back because it's easier to run in after a ball than to backtrack. Well, that's exactly what Flood did not do. When Northrup sent a deep fly to center, Flood's first few steps were in, and then he realized his mistake, turned to run back, but it was too late for him to recover. The ball hit the wall and the 2 runs scored. If Flood breaks back, he gets to it. The inning's over. Game still tied. Instead, when Detroit added another single to score Northrup, it was 3-0 Detroit. The Tigers added another one in the 9th and won the game 4-1, wrapping up the 1968 World Series for the Detroit Tigers. And it was only a few days ago that I talked about Southern Cal running back Marcus Allen and the amazing game that he had against Oklahoma in 1981. Well, a few weeks later, in 1981, he had another amazing game, even though the Trojans couldn't seal the deal with a win. Allen rushed for 211 yards in a 13-10 loss to Arizona. It was the 5th consecutive game with Allen rushing for at least 200 yards to set a new collegiate record. Allen would also set the NCAA record for the most 200-yard rushing games in a season that year. And on this day in 1993, Jeff Maggert won his first PGA Tour event, and he did it under the lights. Now, when you think golf, you don't envision night golf, and unless you're Ty Webb, you're definitely not very good at it. And that's because golf is meant to be played under the sunshine and finish up before nightfall. Well, this particular week in Orlando was a little bit rainy, and it had delayed play off and on over the course of the tournament. On this, the final day of the Walt Disney World Oldsmobile Classic, weather had delayed play a little over an hour. Maggert was playing in the final group and cruising to the win, but he was losing the race with the sun. So tournament officials went into action, and they moved the rented floodlights that had illuminated the driving range in the early dawn hours to behind the 18th green to give a baseball stadium feel to the final green. Maggert rolled in his final putt at 7:29 p.m. Sundown had been 7:01. The quick thinking by the officials prevented everybody having to come back the following day to play the final hole. Maggert won his first PGA tournament by 3 shots over Greg Kraft. Time now for today's non-sports fun fact. If you have ever wondered why America was named after Amerigo Vespucci, well, it's because the cartographers who designed the first maps showing this new place that Columbus had supposedly found first had never heard of that guy. The map makers were under the impression that Vespucci was the first to discover it. That's all I've got for you today. I'll be back with more tomorrow on This Day in Sports History.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website, Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.